So I've just got done watching the Tulsi Gabbard interview on Joe Rogan's podcast, and because a lot of you in the past have been asking me to make a video on Tulsi Gabbard, I think this would be a good opportunity to discuss her, because I do know who she is and stuff, but it's good to have a reference point to kind of jump in on her various policy positions. And of course, I've watched the old interview she did with him, because I think she did one before, and that was about maybe 6 months ago, maybe a bit longer, when she hadn't announced she was running for president. But yeah, she brings up some interesting points. I got a couple notes here just to give me some talking points and some stuff to jump off from. But as you go away from the interview, if you watch it, or if you guys just want me to tell you what it's like, she comes across as obviously a really normal person. I'm actually pretty impressed how normal she comes across, in terms of it'd be so easy to go on a podcast like this and be caught out really bad and make a statement you didn't want to. Like, can you imagine Joe Biden on this podcast? Or someone else like that, or maybe even someone like Barack Obama. You think they might slip up, but because she comes across as such a normal person, she really, everything she says is really, really natural. And yeah, so let's jump into some of the things she spoke about. So I liked her little story at the start, saying how, she's from Hawaii, and they have, aloha and stuff, that sort of, I don't know exactly what it means, but it kind of get the vibe. It's like being friendly with everyone, having a community. And she said when she first went to Congress, she got her mum, who owns some sort of small business, maybe a bakery or something, her mum to make this toffee, and she made her mum make enough toffee for everyone in Congress, all the members of Congress, and then another box for all of their staff. And then she said a lot of people then really paid attention to her and tried to be nice to her, even Republicans and stuff. She said that's what you need more of in politics, more cooperation. Not that I necessarily agree with that, because you see what the Republicans are like, but again, it's a nice story that says a lot about her and stuff. And that's something I didn't really disagree with her in the podcast. She kept talking about having to reach out across the aisle to get stuff we agree with the Republicans. But I don't know if she's just saying that because she knows Joe Rogan's audience does have a lot of Republicans in it. Because when I'm thinking about that, think about all the times Republicans haven't helped Democrats out at all. They literally stole a Supreme Court seat from President Obama. Mitch McConnell literally gets rid of anything the Congress passed at the moment. When did Republicans ever help Democrats? Obama tried to appeal to them so many times, that didn't work. So I don't really agree with her, logic that we got to work more with each other. It sounds more like an Obama talking point. Something I don't really agree with. The sentiment is nice, isn't it? Like, we need more, unity in politics. We need to help each other more. But at the end of the day, look at how Republicans act time and again. Even when Democrats do offer an olive branch on things like, Obama with Obamacare, they keep taking more and more, and they just do whatever they want. And the way at the moment they're not even holding Donald Trump to account for any of the crimes he's committing shows you everything you need to know about them. And of course, it goes without saying, most Republicans are completely bought by corporations anyway. And even if you wanted some help, Republicans often wouldn't help you because of, their donors and stuff. So remember, after the Vegas shooting, Donald Trump said straight away, maybe we should think about banning bump stocks. And the next day he said no, because the NRA apparently rang him up and said they'd pull funding for his next campaign and stuff. And that's the way politics works in America. So I agree with the sentiment, but, realistically, do you really want to start working with Republicans more? The best thing to do is vote Republicans out. And, a lot of Democrats won't even work with you, so you need to change the system as well. But obviously, a lot of the reason people like Tulsi Gabbard is her anti-interventionism, and because she is a veteran herself, she has experience of serving in Iraq, and she makes a lot of good points. So in the interview, they watched Eisenhower's final speech as president when he talked about the military-industrial complex and stuff. And then she did a good job of really diving deep into that and talking about all the special interests and stuff. And, these politicians don't lie awake at night thinking about all the soldiers being killed over there. But she's saying, with her experience, that's something she'd always think about, because she's seen her friends and brothers and sisters in combat being killed. So she would think about that, and she knows the price and the human cost of war, so that would influence her decisions in foreign policy. She's not like, George Bush or Dick Cheney, who sell out the American people for profit, sell out, the lives of many Americans just to, get oil in Iraq or things like Venezuela at the moment. So I really like that point, and there's not too much more to be said. She just has a rational view of the world. But there's one thing I do want to criticise her on a bit, and as some of you know, I have a degree in international relations, so it kind of comes from this standpoint. She kept talking about how the trade war with China could escalate into a full war, and that this includes nuclear war, and we should take the threat of nuclear war more seriously. Which I kind of think, not that I don't think nuclear war could happen and stuff, but I kind of think it's a bit overblown. So there's a political ideology in international relations called realism, right? So it's all about how the world acts with no morals. It's all about power and power dynamics. So in this sort of theoretical mindset, a country like China is never going to start using nuclear weapons. And also we need to take into account the MAD theory, mutually assured destruction, which means, if you fire a nuke at someone, they're going to fire one back. You might as well be shooting a nuke at yourself. And in terms of the power dynamic as well, China is one of the biggest markets in the world. It needs this globalization to thrive. It has massive amounts of business with the US, and I know they have a trade war at the moment, but China does need the US as much as the US needs China. Having a nuclear war with them wouldn't really do much for them. It's much better to have a cold war with the US if it wants to go that way. Because at the same time, China could potentially survive and could be okay without the US. Because I think in terms of the power dynamic, I think the US does rely on China a bit more than China does, because China has a lot more power in its part of the world than the US does now. And it's an emerging economy which is making alliances with lots of other emerging economies, especially those in Africa. So I think it's kind of silly to think China would start a nuclear war. And it's going to be the next superpower. It might be the biggest superpower in the world, maybe in the next 30 years and stuff, but I don't think nuclear war is going to happen. And all these states having nuclear weapons is obviously a problem, things like North Korea, but even I've argued in the past, Kim Jong-un is a rational actor. He knows if he fires his nukes, his whole country is getting destroyed and he's probably going to die. Despite us painting him as a man, he is realistic and he knows that will happen. So even if you said the threat of nuclear war from North Korea is high, I still doubt that. The only threat of nuclear war is if you invade North Korea. That's the only threat, because he might think I have nothing to lose anymore. That's the only threat of that. So I don't really agree with her stance on nuclear war, but it's interesting to bring it up and talk about how the war started in the first place. How did the war with Japan and America start in World War II? Japan was expanding its empire. The US didn't like that, so the US put an embargo on Japan. It didn't sell it oil anymore, which it needed because it got a lot of its oil from the US. And then the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. So, it can start with something like that, but in our more globalised society and globalised world, I don't really think it will. Now, sticking on the subject of war, I didn't know this, but Tulsi Gabbard actually met with Assad, the dictator of Syria, and they had a conversation, and she's been criticised a lot for it, but basically he was just spelling out what he wanted, and she didn't say too much about this, to be honest. It wasn't really, telling us everything, but she said Assad is more concerned about his country. He has a lot of the same fears many people do. He wants a lot of international groups out of the country. Of course he would, because they're trying to topple him. And he's discussing things like, the Kurds, and like Turkey wants to get a foothold in Syria to kill the Kurds and stuff and take back that territory. So it was interesting. She met with him, but she's saying at the end of the day, we've got to meet with our adversaries, because that's the only way for world peace and, to resolve issues. It's way better than war. We should have maybe met with Saddam Hussein, and just because you meet them doesn't mean you like them, but it's better than the alternative. And, what's going on with Iran at the moment, you might have seen in the news, I think, is it 120,000 soldiers they're getting ready for war with Iran at the moment? Wouldn't it be way better to do what Obama did and meet with them? But because Trump and Bolton are so in bed with the Israelis and the Saudis and stuff, they want to go to war with Iran because that's the main enemy of those two groups, who have a massive influence in US politics. And this is what another point she touched on. She says it's all like a racket, basically. They're all different interests. Why would Trump say on the campaign that Saudi Arabia did 9/11 and we shouldn't fund them anymore? But now Trump is saying we can't pull our support of the Saudi war in Yemen because we have a massive arms deal coming up with Saudi Arabia. Isn't that a nice logic for someone who said Saudi Arabia did 9/11, we can't stop their genocidal war because we want to sell them weapons? And yeah, Tulsi went on to say, Trump said a lot of this stuff, but he eventually turned the swamp, which he was going to drain, into a cesspool, brought back all the neoconservatives from the Bush administration, like Pompeo, like John Bolton. So the Trump administration is essentially a Bush administration, maybe on steroids if they go to war with Iran, because that would be even worse than Iraq, probably, and obviously it will affect all of us, because imagine all the renewed Islamic terrorism, this time from Shia groups and stuff. So it's really not going to help anyone. And then she's going on, staying on this subject of foreign policy and stuff. She's talking about Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, who obviously exposed US war crimes in places like Iraq. And she's saying she would pardon Edward Snowden straight away. She said Julian Assange is a bit more difficult because he's been charged with other things. But I think she was leaning towards dropping charges against him from the US. So that was interesting to hear. And, not many candidates say that. I think only a couple do. So she has a good stance on free speech. And then this is another thing I didn't agree with her, linking the free speech thing. Her and Joe Rogan were talking about conservative people being deplatformed on social media, like Alex Jones, Paul Joseph Watson. And Tulsi was saying no one should be deplatformed because it is essentially like the public square now. The social media platforms are a free speech issue these days, even though they're owned by private companies, and Joe Rogan was agreeing with her, you know, you should have the right to say anything on social media. And I really disagree with this point, because Joe Rogan's going on there saying, Paul Joseph Watson, what has he ever done? How about pushing the conspiracy theory that Muslims burned down Notre Dame straight after it happened? That's, you know, spreading racism, spreading hatred towards a certain group, and fake news. So I think there has to be rules, because what, is the government going to come down and do something to him? You can't. So there is no international government. We're not in like a one world country, are we? We're not all linked together. We don't all follow the same rules. So I think a private corporation not wanting certain people on its platform is fine by me, because I don't know where this logic comes from, but if they don't deplatform Alex Jones, who pushed a conspiracy theory about a mass shooting where the children didn't exist and the parents were all crisis actors, leading to many of these parents being harassed. One has killed themselves many years after the shootings, and he was one of the prime people who was being harassed. I think that person shouldn't be on social media, because a private corporation has terms and service. Alex Jones is free to set up his own website, which I think he has, and you can have people there. That's your own website. You get the money and you fund that. The internet is the public square, not the social media corporations. But I think what these two were saying was also Facebook felt guilty that it might have swayed the election with all the fake news, it didn't moderate properly. And these people do have a lot of influence, and they're pandering so hard to conservatives. Like Jack Dorsey met with Trump, and they're talking about getting all these conservative people to help run Twitter and the way they moderate things. Same with Facebook and stuff. They're pandering to the right wing because they're so terrified of them, and they don't deplatform loads of fucking Nazis on Twitter and Facebook. But obviously Joe Rogan starts like free speech because he has loads of different people on his podcast, and he believes you should hear all different sides. But I think there is extremists that you shouldn't hear from, like ISIS fighters and stuff. Yeah, ban them. People who push racism all the time, racist conspiracies, you can ban them as well. People who push insane conspiracy theories about, you know, parents being actors, pretending their kid has died in a mass shooting, that shouldn't be allowed on a private corporation's platform, especially if they have rules. And there are rules against that sort of stuff in the world, but obviously online it gets a bit more tricky because you have all these different countries and these people from different countries using one platform. But I admit it's something I need to do a little more research on, because Elizabeth Warren also said we should break up Facebook, and the co-founder of Facebook said a similar thing. So I need to read more into that, because them two were talking about it. But at the moment, that is my opinion. I don't feel so bad when people pushing hate speech get banned off a private platform. But I can see why people are fearful giving all this power to someone, because what if a successor of Mark Zuckerberg is a really hard right-winger and he starts banning all the left-wing people for not hate speech just because he doesn't agree with them? I can see that argument and I can see that logic. So I haven't covered everything, but one last thing. They were talking about sort of AI and new technology, automation like Andrew Yang talks about, and Joe Rogan was asking her opinion on these things, and she did say that she would consider UBI just like Andrew Yang would, but she needs to look more into it. And I'm interested in UBI in a sense, but I've also been pretty critical of it, because what I see it is a desperate attempt from the billionaires and millionaires to prop up the consumer capitalist system that is also destroying the planet in terms of climate change, obviously. Because most CO2 emissions, I think it's 70+%, is done by just 100 corporations. So it's no longer, you know, I have to stop driving, I got to take the bus. It's dismantle this capitalist system, the current capitalist system. And if UBI is also a replacement for benefits and stuff, I don't agree with it. So she said she might consider it, and she's looking into it. So she hasn't said anything definitive. And I think the Labour Party in the UK said they might support it. So it'd be interesting to see where she goes with that. If it's on top of benefits that people already have, and it's on top of, you know, meaningful reform in other areas, I could support it. But at the moment, the way Andrew Yang describes it, I definitely don't support it. But they're also talking about AI, how it could be like a new arms race. Like, you know, do we develop AI as closely as, you know, countries like China are, because we know they'll use that against us, and it'll be like the Cold War. She's thinking like, maybe we should have some laws, you know, just because we can doesn't mean we should. We should keep developing nuclear weapons, like, you know, the Tsar Bomba was the biggest one ever dropped, and that was by the Soviet Union, but, you know, how much more extreme do you get, how much more do you need? She was sort of suggesting, you know, there might be something we need to do as a human race to regulate this stuff, because it is quite scary, sentient AI controlling weapon systems. And you know, Joe Rogan was also saying you could have a scenario where one army are just fighting a bunch of robots and drones, and you know, that could be the future. They are creating drones with more capabilities in terms of weapons and stuff, and people just controlling them. And you see in all the sci-fi and the video games, that's the way it's going, and it seems pretty scary the way they were talking about it. But yeah, that's not really much you can be done. That's more of a specific issue the human race will have to be dealing with, rather than President Tulsi Gabbard if she gets elected. And yeah, maybe one last thing I want to mention, they talked about the opioid crisis, and something I like what she said is they have to prosecute the people who've been selling these drugs. And you know, they've been selling more addictive, more high dosage drugs, and the people need to be held accountable who've done this. And I saw there was that family, I don't know too much about them, apart they donated to the Tate Modern in London and they gave the donations back, who were being sued by 2 states and they were going bankrupt because of this suing. And she's saying we need to do that more, because a lot of the companies that are selling the drugs that get people addicted also sell drugs to help them get off addiction, so it's just making profit no matter what. It's pretty sick. And you know, it plays into how much influence Big Pharma has, which Tulsi was making the point of, how much control they have over politics, that there is nothing to be done. And it's something I like her and Bernie saying, you need to stop this. You need to completely overturn the healthcare system in the US, because doctors are recommending this stuff for profit. Andrew Yang brought this up as well. Doctors are recommending these drugs because they're paid to, and then they get people addicted for life. You know, at times it's worse than heroin addiction. It's actually more addictive than heroin. You're recommending someone to have that. And I think Joe Rogan said in the past, he really hurt his nose, that maybe broke it, and they were trying to push some really high dosage addictive drug on him, and he was saying, no, I'm fine, I don't want that. They're seriously making him consider it because it makes them money. And Andrew Yang was saying this as well, is that doctors need to be working because they like being doctors, not because they're trying to get super rich off selling people all these addictive drugs. And that is something that I really like her saying as well. But overall, this wasn't a comprehensive breakdown of all her policies. It was just a conversation for like 2 hours. I enjoyed listening to it, and I know people have problems with Joe Rogan, so do I. I don't like him bringing on people like Jordan Peterson or Alex Jones, but at least he's a bit consistent, that he brings on people across the political spectrum, because he also had Jimmy Dore on as well. Yeah, she comes across as a really normal and cool person, you know, someone who could appeal to my generation. I know I'm not American, but I can imagine why a lot of young people would like her, because she does seem really down to earth and normal, and like I said, she came across really naturally in the interview, not like a typical politician, not like someone like Joe Biden, like I was making the point. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see her in the debates. I hope she gets a bit more prominent, and I hope her voice doesn't get drowned out by the rest of them. But I think she has a really interesting stance as a woman, as a young person, and as a veteran. You know, a young person should be 40 by the time she's president, but that's young for a president, isn't it? And yeah, I think what she's running on, especially as the US is ramping up tensions with Iran for no reason, running on anti-interventionism and pointing out the cost of war, I think will be really effective. So if you like this video, maybe leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you want to find me on social media, follow me at The Tabernacle on both Twitter and Instagram. I also have a WordPress blog, which is just The Tabernacle WordPress. I write about various issues. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.